Hi. So it's the end of December, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm meeting with Kurt Nelson, and we're going to talk about some of his background in how to set goals for 2025. So welcome, Kurt. Could you please give us some of your background?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this. So, my background, I am a behavioral scientist. I have a PhD in IO psychology, have been working with businesses around employee engagement, goal setting, motivation, etc. for, oh my God, 30 years. It's feeling crazy. I had hair. I don't have hair anymore. I am a Minneapolis resident for the past 35 years and just love the city and love the work that I do. So hopefully we can help people understand a little bit about having setting their goals and doing it maybe a little bit better so that they're more likely to achieve those. So.
So one of the reasons that I thought it'd be fun to have you on here at the end of the year is you are a small business person. You started your business in Minneapolis, right?
Yes, I did. I have
And
a few different employees, and we are a small business headquartered here in Minneapolis in the Whittier neighborhood. So
it's called the Lantern Group, right?
it is called the Lantern Group, and so we do. The fun thing though is that this is a B2B business, so I am doing most of my work outside of Minnesota actually, and doing a lot of work with corporations around the country, East Coast, West Coast, Chicago, various different things. We do a few in-state, but most of that work is out of town. And as part of the Lantern Group, we actually started about 3 years ago subsidiary. So most of our work had been business to business, and now we are doing work with some consumer stuff. So a lot of the work that we had worked with organizations around was about change. How do you get your employees to change, or how do you change an organization, whether that be culture, behaviors, et cetera, various different things. And we brought in a lot of the science. That's the niche that we bring. We bring a kind of perspective of saying, hey, we're gonna not just do this, we're gonna bring a science perspective to this in order to make sure that we're maximizing that capability. And my employee Ben, who's been with me the longest, about 13, 14 years now, he brought up this fantastic, wonderful idea, right? It's that I don't know why we hadn't thought about this before, but he said, we do all this great work for organizations, we do all this great work for companies. Why don't we take some of that insight and apply it in on the consumer side? So we did, and we started a subsidiary. It's called Behavior Shift, and Behavior Shift sells tools that help people achieve behavior change better for themselves or achieve their goals better for themselves. And so I know we had talked prior to this about one of the modules that we created, which is called Goal Shift, and helps people kind of lay out the plan to develop what we call keystone goals and then put a plan in place in order to achieve those. So,
All right. So just to kind of summarize that, you're can focus on corporations and helping them with their employees with incentives and goal setting, things like that, right?
hmm
And then out of that, you now have two workbooks, I believe, that are more consumer focused that people can buy, and it helps them to kind of prioritize and set goals. Is that right?
So we have a number of different products. So we have three journals that we call their guided journals. So two of them are under the brand of called Brain Shift, and so those are more science oriented. They're 13-week daily guided journals. So we have prompts every single day to help you identify what you want to achieve that day. Think about some of the behavioral science principles that we talk about each week in there. So each week you get a little behavioral science tidbit to help you understand why you behave the way you do or some of the actions that you might take. And then we have a weekend at the end of the week, a review to kind of look back on that. And so those are the brain shift ones. What we found though is that many people were really love that, but there are a number of people who the science was too much, so we created one that's called Daily Shift, and that is a more straightforward every day. I am going to just put together what am I going to do for today and really bring in some of the action steps in order to do that. We build some science into all of these, so it's not just that simple. There's a weekly kind of summary and input of different kind of concepts that we talk about. We do the review. We also include things such as brain breaks and other gratitude type approaches that we know from science really help us in making sure that we maintain the motivation that we want in order to achieve those goals. And again, in all of those, we do have a piece at the beginning to help you set what we call our keystone goals. Keystone goals, if you think about, the keystone in a bridge arch is that big piece that kind of holds everything together. Well, those keystone goals are those big goals that we have that parlay themselves into much bigger aspects of our life. So it's not the goal of, hey, I am going to, go to the gym 5 times this week. The goal is that I am going to, change my
Go
my
five times this month. Is that?
yeah, maybe it's 5 times this month, right? That might be the big goal. No, it's like changing my health and making sure that I am healthy, not just at the end of this year, but 20 years down the road, so that when I have grandkids, that I can be healthy and pick those grandkids up and carry them around. So what do I need to do in order to achieve that keystone goal? And that's
And
a
and is so that I'm guessing that part like just taking the one you mentioned there and like making the goal to be overall more healthy
mhm.
kind of allows the individual a little bit more flexibility and maybe not the um you know I don't know pitfalls that comes with not making it because like if I said I'm going to go for 3 days to the gym every week and I don't do it, now I start kind of getting upset with myself. And I think that creates kind of this disincentive to actually move forward.
Yeah,
Is
there's a concept in behavioral science that's called the what the hell effect that around goals and habits and all of those types of things. So if I do set the goal of going to the gym for 4 days a week and I miss one day, or I have a diet restriction that I'm trying to do and I, eat that donut in the break room, our brains tend to, or not tend to, but often go to this idea of what the hell, now I've broken this and I might as well eat that, 5 more donuts and, or
right.
not go to the gym. And so the way that so what these keystone goals are, they're actually in the literature, it's called aspirational goals. And so these are big picture goals that we have. Now, aspirational goals are fantastic for from a motivational perspective and the way you do. However, they are not good at providing you specifics on what you need to do. For that, you do need what we call milestones or stepping stones, or as other people call it, task goals or concrete goals. And that would be, hey, I am going to, in order to maintain or be healthy, I need to start exercising. So, how am I going to do that? At what frequency am I going to do that? For what duration am I going to do that? And what am I going to do during that exercise time? So, the more specific you get, the better on those. And many people have probably heard of SMART goals, right? The acronym, excuse me, to make sure that you are, doing your goals that are
Specific, measurable,
action, yeah,
attainable, uh,
attainable.
uh,
What is the R?
uh,
T is timely. R. I should know this. You're making me. Here we go. But yeah, so those are things that we tend to know. Now,
is it
if
repeatable? No,
replica. No, actually, I don't know. Actually, there's actually two different versions of it, so it depends on, what they are. Relevant. That's it. It's
relevant.
specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound is the way that we look at those. So the key piece on that is those are great, but those are those concrete goals. And what ends up happening is if that's it, oftentimes they don't have the same type of motivation, the drive to get you up in the morning to keep doing them. Now, there's other tricks that we can do or techniques that we can bring in to help you do that. But that is a key aspect of when we talk about goals and setting goals. I always try to understand what are those bigger keystone goals? How do they align with what you want out of your life and who you are as a person, what we call your true self, understanding what are the values that you have for yourself and for what you want to be, what that means for the goals that you want to set and accomplish. And then from those, let's build out these milestones and stepping stones that we can build off of some of these other aspects.
So I want to move from kind of the theory that you just talked about and do a little experiment with helping me to develop goals, because this is definitely a life skill that I could use assistance with. But before we jump into that, I wanted to ask you about your podcast, because I know you're
Oh,
doing a podcast yourself. And I wanted to, maybe you could tell people what it's actually about, the name of it, how long you've been doing it, and yeah.
well, thank you. Yeah, I totally forgot about the podcast, even though that's a big part of what we do. So I am a co-host along with Tim Houlihan, who formerly was of Minneapolis, is now lived down in North Carolina, and we've been hosting the Behavioral Grooves podcast for going on almost 8 years now. And it is a podcast that brings behavioral science to everybody. So what we try to do is talk with researchers. We've been lucky enough to have some of the top researchers around the globe, three Nobel laureates, along with a number of other top researchers from the top universities that talk about why we do what we do. So, trying to understand our human behavior and the implications from that. And so, we have 450 plus episodes right now. We've won a few awards. It is really, if you're interested in trying to decipher human behavior from a science perspective, we bring some really good people to help do that. And so it's a fun. It's as I've talked to you before, it's the funnest part of my week when we get to do that. So
Yeah, and I've haven't listened to all 450, but I've listened to some, and I would say it's quite an interesting podcast. So
thank you, appreciate that.
um, okay, well, so before we started talking today, I had written down a goal that I wanted you to help me with, but now I'm thinking maybe I didn't write it down correctly because,
Well, let's see. We'll
well,
we'll we'll do real time analysis here.
as you know, I write the Better Minneapolis newsletter, and so my goal that I wrote down was very specific, that I wanted to write 50 stories this year, which I
Okay.
thought was something that I could accomplish, right? That's 2 a week, 25 weeks. But now I'm thinking maybe after what you were saying, um, it should be more of an aspirational goal. Like maybe I need to be thinking more about, uh, you know, I want my newsletter to influence the discussion in the city, and then I have things under it. So help me, walk me
Yeah.
through this.
So actually, I mean, the what you do, what you just said, the 50 articles this year is actually a pretty standard, and it's not a bad goal. What you're very specific. It's 50 articles. All right, we're going to do it for 25 weeks. I take it you're taking 1 week off. I mean, I might even take 2 weeks off if I were you. But there you go. But so there's that. Now
Well,
the
let me jump in there. Is that a bad way to set a goal? Like to say, like, I know I'm probably not going to get to 50, but I'm going to say 50 anyway because I kind of want to stretch. Is that a bad way to do that, or?
No, actually, it's not. So if that stretch is attainable, if you know that if I was really focused and everything aligned, and it doesn't have to be 100%, but man, if I was at 98, 97%, that I can reach that goal. It's pretty hard if you had set that I'm going to do, say, 100 articles this year, and you know you still have your full-time work and whatever else that you're doing and all of that, then that becomes actually demotivating because our brains go, there's no way in hell that we're going to do this, so why would I even try? Why would I even start? But the idea of if you knew what was in a reasonable amount. So if you took what you did this year and you said, "All right, that was manageable. I did that pretty well, but next year I want to go above that. I want to do better than that. And I think I can do X percent or X number of articles above that." That's a pretty good way of setting that goal. And now for you, Terry, one of the things that because I know you and I know that you kind of live and breathe better Minneapolis. We talk about it quite a bit in various different aspects of it. So this actually, because you have that, that's in the back of your head already. So uh I would talk to many people about making a goal aspirational for them, but many people we do it naturally. We tie those specific goals into things that we already know that we have an aspiration for. Now, I say that having a more specific aspirational goal around what you want to achieve with Better Minneapolis might be that keystone goal that I talked about would be powerful. I think that would be really good to have. And that in and of itself, just by the mere kind of going through the exercise of identifying what is it, like you said, I want to make an impact on the policies within the city, or I want to have so many people feel better connected with what's going on in the city. And one of the parts of those big goals is to make that emotional, that there needs to be an emotional connection. So in the science of this, we call it an intrinsic motivator. So what is it that is going to really be important to you to drive that? But you kind of have
So,
that in the back of your head.
so as an example, so I don't know if this is emotional or not, but let's say my goal is to increase voter turnout,
Yeah.
right? And so it was say 30% last time. I mean, it'd be very hard to measure if it goes up to 40, how I contributed to that. But that to me would, I would take a sense of accomplishment from that, but I don't know, is that considered like
So why,
emotional?
yeah, what's the reason that you would want that voter turnout to be up? What's behind that? And
Oh,
so
that's
you mentioned just a bit. That's a sense of accomplishment that I had an influence in on city politics or on the voting within this, and that's okay. And oftentimes people feel really bad about kind of these selfish, goals that are, hey, I want to, because I want to get a promotion, or I want to be recognized as the top in my field, or I want to do whatever that would be. And I really push against that, because that's one of the better motivators that we can have. Um, and oftentimes we feel like, oh, I should have something more altruistic. I should be something about the good for everything. And that's important too. But there's a place for having those selfish kind of goals for ourselves, particularly in these types of things.
well, so I guess that when listening to myself as I talk through that, I guess that personal accomplishment would be more I don't, maybe superficial. The deeper motive I was kind of thinking about when you were asking why do I want to see greater turnout is because I feel like it's better for the city, it's better for democracy. Like I feel like it's not a good sign when only 30% of people are voting. And so that would be, I guess, maybe more my emotional part of it. And then how would I measure that, or how do I see that is kind of, well, am I putting out newsletters and engaging people so that they want to vote and want to care about these issues? So
Yeah.
uh, I don't know, all those things are sort of mixed together. So I'm not sure, like, where do I put my, what's the
So, so
keystone
let's
there?
let's go back. So I think I mean, again, we can come back and talk about what that big keystone is. I think what we, the way that, when we work through with Goal Shift, or when we're working with people on this, what we're trying to really do is understand what their values are, what is going to be meaningful for them, create some other aspects. One of the big things that we ask also in that part is, what are you willing to give up? So again, oftentimes we think, oh, well, I'll just do X and add that on. And, there's only a limited amount of time, and there's only a limited amount of energy or focus that we have. And oftentimes we don't realize that in order to achieve a big goal, we often have to give something up, whether that be, time with family, whether that be going out with friends, whether that be, the money that I would normally spend, to go on vacation. I now have to invest in my new work that I'm doing, or whatever it would be. But understanding that, because that can also be a big detractor if we don't realize that, and then moving forward. That being said, where I would go with you is, I think that the aspirational goal, that keystone goal, we need to kind of come back. But I really like where you were going with this idea that it's about democracy, and I feel that if I can add to democracy, then I've done really good. That gets back to some really self-core pieces about who you are as an individual, and those are what are going to power this through. I think the bigger piece, though, is, all right, let's take a look at your 50 articles that you want to write. That's a great goal. But now we have to break that down into, so how are we going to achieve this? What's the process that I'm going to do? And how do we set that up so that it is repeatable, so that it does become part of this aspect of, all right, I can do this, I can achieve it. You need to show some progress on that, but also so that it doesn't become grudgery. One of the things that we know is that
Gre-
oftentimes repeated,
Grudgery. I like
yeah.
that word. Is that a real word?
I don't know if I just made it up. I
I
might
don't
have,
know. It's good. I
I'm a
like it.
doctor, so I can make up those words, right? But that really comes into, all right, so what are you going to do every week? If it's 2 articles a week, if you're, and again, going back to your big overview picture of, like, all right, if we're really about getting voter turnout, making, people more interested in politics, what are the articles going to be about? How are you going to interest people? How are you going to interest people who may not be interested in politics at a deep enough level to be really searching it out, but would be interested if they could find it, haphazardly, or a friend sent it to them? So there comes into this a part of the planning of putting that in. How are we going to do that? What are some of the steps we go in? And then it comes down to, what's the process that I'm going to do, or that you're going to do, in order to do this? And how much research are you going to put in? I mean, so we've 450, episodes of a podcast. We kind of have that down, that we're doing. But when we started, we had to really think about, all right, who's doing the research on the guests that we're having? Who is going to write up those questions? Are we going to edit? Are we going to share that? Are we going to split that off? How are we going to actually do the recording? How are we going to do the post production pieces of all of this? How are we going to get this out on social media? What is our plan for connecting with those guests? Who's going to send out the emails? Who's going to do the scheduling? All of those nitpicking kind of little details. And if you don't have those set up, and at least a process in place to think about how that's going to happen, you're setting yourself up for, most likely, not achieving that goal.
So the books that you produced, I know I've been through one, so there is a lot of writing these things down, right?
Yep.
Like, and uh, so maybe if you start with that overarching goal that, okay, I want to increase voter turnout, but then, as you were saying, you start looking at it like on a daily basis, and all those things that you were just talking about, you kind of have to write out, I guess, like, okay, this week I'm going to, for the podcast, maybe say I'm going to contact three potential guests, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you break it down week by week like that. For me, it might be like, well, I want to spend 2 hours researching a specific topic, but
Right.
um, one of the things that you mentioned there is, very pertinent to me, where I think of, okay, that would be a goal, and I don't know if it would fit under the increasing voter turnout, but I do want to expand the audience and somehow reach those 70% of the people that aren't voting. And
Yeah.
so, so in that way, I have some goals, goals under goals, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah.
um,
Which
somehow I want to, maybe add other personal stories and other elements to what I'm doing, so that these people who maybe don't really care that much about politics might start to take an interest.
So, Terry, what you just did there, I think, is really telling, right? So, the idea of understanding what that larger goal was, it's not about 50 articles, because if I just created 50 articles and they went to the same people that are already voting, it's not going to increase voter turnout, right? So, it is now we're looking at this and saying, how do I craft these articles so that they can bring in some of that 70% who are not. And, there's probably, if you think about this and we can brainstorm this, is like, of that 70%, you're not going to get all 70. So let's take a look at what are the next 10 to 20% that are, at the cusp of saying, they might have voted once in a city election, but they don't regularly do it, or, whatever reasons they are. And then how do we connect with those people? And so then that actually can help you drive, like, what is the content? As you said, you might have some more personal stories. You might have some other ways to bring people in. It might be some like, what's going on in the community, in the local neighborhood that they're in. And then, oh, by the way, here's a political component that I'm now going to read because of that. And I don't know. That's, those are things that you need to figure out. But just by doing that larger piece, it changes then the kind of way that you're thinking about those fifty articles, and maybe even looking at that and going, I don't need to do 50, I need to do 40 of these that are going to really attract some of those other people in.
So yeah, that makes total sense. So maybe you could help me with this goal. Part of wanting to increase voter turnout is also having this belief, and this is where I know in my life I get hung up a lot of times, where you have sort of abstract goals,
Yeah.
right? But that you need to somehow have a plan of action to make them, you know, realized, I guess. So
Yeah.
the part of why I started writing this was because I was just so tired of the vitriolic back and
Yeah.
forth of our current politics, right? Um, and so I sort of wanted to make the case for something that incorporated listening at least a little bit to the other side, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's a very kind of, I don't know if you would consider that an aspirational goal, but it's basically, I'm kind of saying I want to get people talking together a little bit more and being a little less mean to each other, so that they're not turned off by politics and see it as like a process where people get involved and can do something constructive. How
Well,
do
and,
I
and
break
so
that down?
yeah, so this is interesting, because what you're talking about is another process, another component that we often see. I see this oftentimes within businesses, but also in people's personal lives, is this idea that we don't just have one goal, right? We have a multitude of goals. And, a lot of common wisdom is, oh, you can only focus on so many goals at one time, which is true. However, and here's the caveat to that, is depending upon how those goals leverage up to each other, right? So, in other words, you're talking about creating a community that talks and maybe has some people with some different perspectives and viewpoints, and to have a more civilized dialogue around these issues that maybe we can learn from each other and understand each other a little bit better. All right, that isn't so far away from this idea of increasing voter turnout, and particularly as you think about the way that you're setting up, Better Minneapolis, and this idea that this is a newsletter that goes out that talks about some interesting political pieces, but you can interview people from across the aisle, or you can interview people that have a different perspective, and then you can form a community. And I see that already in the comment sections that you have, and all of the other online components where you are doing that. And it's not saying that it's going to be 100%, but that overlap means that you can start accomplishing both goals through some tactics. And again, it's looking at those, again, the stepping stones or the milestones that we have about the tactics that you're using in order to achieve that. And I am a big, big proponent of, if you can use a tactic and it applies to two of your larger aspirational goals, fantastic, right?
Define tactic for me. What do you?
So tactics would be, it's that 50, for you it was the 50 articles that you want to write for, Better Minneapolis. And then, even more specific as we get down into them, what are the topics going to be on those? How are you going to, market them? Are there other ways that you can get that word out? But all of that is all bringing into the larger goal of saying, hey, what we're trying to do here is to increase, participation in local city government, particularly as it relates to voting, but also create the civil discourse amongst people, so that we aren't at each other's throats and just dismissing everybody if they don't fully align with exactly my views. I need to want to do this. And so you're doing that through a couple different, of those tactics that we just said.
So help me so when I think of goals, and I've experienced this in my professional life, but I'm also thinking in terms of, the interviews of other candidates. How how do you handle it when part of your goal involves another person, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't. So if one of my goals is to promote civil dialogue, and I want to be able to have like all four candidates for mayor on the show, even though I may not agree with everything that all
Yeah.
four of them have to say, or maybe they don't like my newsletter, and so they say, well, I don't want to come on your show or whatever. Like, I don't have control over, I can't make them participate in my goal.
No, you can't, right? And but this is, so think about somebody who's in a sales job and they're trying to sell something. They can't force somebody to buy their product. You have to sell it. And so part of what you are needing to do is to understand, all right, uh, I what am I offering to them? Again, that will be aligned with my goal, but they're going to have their own goals. They're going to have their own motivations for doing things. And so understanding how to tap into that. That's not to say that you're going to be 100% successful on that. You may not get every candidate on. They might be some people who are just, no, I'm not going to go on your show. I don't want to be part of that newsletter. I don't like it, or whatever it would be. That goes back to then, all right, let's take a bigger look at our larger perspective. All right, well, we got three out of the four candidates, or even two out of the four candidates. Okay, am I achieving, is that driving success around my larger aspirational goal, that keystone goal of getting maybe some people who are may not be interested, or may not take the time to, talk or listen to candidates, and instead just go into the voting booth and vote, because I've always voted DFL, so I'm going to vote who's ever the DFL candidate, as opposed to taking time to do some research. If you can make that actionable and interesting, maybe having two, it might not be perfect, but you're moving towards that. And anytime that we talk about motivation, progress is a huge motivator. So there's a book by Teresa Amiable. I always mispronounce her last name. I apologize for that. A professor at Harvard who wrote the progress principle. And basically, a lot of our motivation is like we can see progress. If we're making, even if it's just tiny bits of progress, that is really highly motivational for us. And when we get stalled or move backwards, that's where things kind of our motivation decreases. So
Yeah, and I would say, I think I'm thinking about like athletics in particular, like when you
yeah.
have a big goal, whether it's a marathon or a sprint or, and you don't feel like you're making progress towards it. I think that's one of the things that separates the really top-notch athletes is that they're able to continue to push through that, even when they have the setbacks and stuff like that.
Yeah, when we hit that plateau, right? And then anybody that's done any type of a like weightlifting or anything where they're trying to increase how much they can lift or even weight loss, like if they're doing a diet, we often hit those plateaus, and that is a big issue. There's another aspect of that, and sorry, I know we weren't going to talk about motivation here, but actually, we just interviewed Islet Fishbach, who is a uh, professor at the University of Chicago Booth School, and one of the premier researchers on motivation. And she talks about a big piece of which is called the problem of the middle. And when we set a goal, actually, this does pertain to goals. When we set a goal, oftentimes we're very excited about that goal at the beginning. In other words, it's highly, um, cognizant in our brain. It's there. We're excited about it. And then we also know that near the end, once we see the finish line, we get excited about it as well. The problem is in the middle is that we get this
Mm.
lull in motivation. And so, it started with in the 30s and 40s with Hull doing, experiments with rats where you would, put a rat in a maze, excuse me, and they'd time it, and they'd time like at the beginning they'd be going really fast, and then the middle they'd go really slow, and then when they get closer to the cheese at the end they'd speed up again. And well, people, we're not that different. It's kind of sad to say, but we're not. And so there's that aspect of when we are thinking about our goals, also understand that, all right, if you set this goal for 50 articles, you'll start off strong, but at some point, whether that's at 10 articles, 20 articles, there will be kind of this decrease in motivation for you. But if you get up to that 35 or 40 articles and you're going, wow, I only got 10 left to meet my goal, then that motivation increases a little bit more. And so we can put in some techniques about how to do that, and maintain that motivation. So you could set, instead of 50 is your big goal, but then like this quarter I want to get this many done, and I would probably set that more than just, all right, so 3 months and take that, what, 4 weeks, whatever that, 24, I forget however many, do the math, right? um and so that would be one of those pieces where you can take that and make that happen. So
Um, and so breaking down larger goals into sort of smaller attainable ones, I was thinking while you're talking like that in that middle stage, it seems like depending on what type of project you're shooting for, it could be very different, right? So
oh yeah.
some maybe you have a year-long project, right? And so uh it can be sometimes difficult, like in those first few months, to build on knowing that like you're not going to see the fruits of your labor for 12 months down the road, right?
Yeah.
And so are you suggesting that like to maintain motivation for that final goal to just maybe break up the
Yeah,
year into a time period that makes sense to you?
break up the year into time periods. Break up if it's a project and there's certain, milestones of that project, what you can do. Again, as you're thinking about this, maybe it's a number component. Maybe it's how many hours that you're actually spending researching or writing, and you break down those pieces of it too, and then you set goals by week or by month, and you can break that down to really help you do that. And particularly if there's a multi-step process to that goal, right? Where, in other words, it isn't like I'm just writing another article every week. It is, I have to do, I want to start a business, or, I want to do this. So I have a certain number of steps that I have to go through in order to do that. That's really easy, not easy, but you can break those down. You can say, all right, I'm going to do this. And as opposed to having that big goal being out there, again, one of the pieces that we know from the science is that there's this element that's called temporal discounting. This idea that the further out something is, it actually gets discounted. The motivational impact that we have on it is discounted, not at a linear rate that you would normally think, but at an exponential rate. So, in other words, the further out it is, the less motivational it is for us. So, the shorter that you can make those little milestones, or whatever you want to call them, that's really important. Another thing that you can do from a motivational perspective is you can start doing things that reward you every day. And this is the other piece of that, is on those milestones, figure out some type of reward, and that can be an extrinsic reward. In other words, all right, I'm going to celebrate with a dinner or something like that, or it can be an intrinsic reward, just like knowing, all right, I've achieved this in various different things. But that reward part is key. But for one thing that we know is that tracking works, right? This idea that if I am supposed to be doing exercise every day, whatever it would be, if I check off a box on every day, that's really great. Jerry Seinfeld used to write 10 jokes a day, and he would X off on his calendar if he did that. And what he said, I thought was really interesting, because it kind of shows the research on this, is that I never wanted to break that chain. I had X's after X's after X's, month after month on my calendar, and I don't want to have that one day that is a blank on that X. That's a really weird, psychological trick that our brain plays, but we don't like breaking those types of streaks. It's kind of streak thing. The problem is when you do break that streak, we already talked about this, it's the what the hell effect. And so make sure that you're not setting yourself up for failure. And oftentimes, like, Katie Milkman is a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania who does a lot of work on this, and she talks about making sure that if you're trying to do something like that, it's like, all right, I want to hit 5 days working out a week, but I give myself a free day, every month or every 2 weeks or whatever it is. So I can skip that day, and then I'm not really breaking it. And I think Duolingo does the same thing, and they have a streak, but you can get a pass or something like that. So
So,
there's,
so that's interesting that you bring up Duolingo. So for people who don't know, it's an app that helps you learn a different language, right?
yeah,
And because as you were talking, and I love the Seinfeld example, but these games and these that we play, like for me, it might be Wordle, someone
yeah,
else's Duolingo. They're tapping into the science of these X's, right? So like it tells me how many days in a row I've played Wordle. And
yep,
so, there is this impact thing where it's like if I do 17 days in a row and then I like miss a day, I'm like, okay, well, I might not play for another week.
yeah.
You know?
But
Um,
then you start back up, and so that's the big piece, right? You got to keep going. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, always had this thing: never skip twice, right? So he's talking about this idea. So again, just that little mantra, or that little, allow yourself that ability to say, I'm not going to be perfect. Nobody is. And it's too much to ask for most people to do that. Give yourself some grace. Allow yourself to have that, and just make sure that when you do it, don't miss twice if you can. So that, there you go.
so I'm going to pivot a little bit on you here because I'm wondering, like we were talking about the length of these goals and kind of getting stuck in the middle. How would you approach something like a city wanting to do something like improve uptown area, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a big goal.
Yep.
And, people have uh, different ideas on how you go about that, about where you start, where you put your money. So it's like, how do you kind of even begin to wrap your hands around setting a goal, right? So this election's coming up. These people that we elect are going to have 4 years to try and figure out stuff like this. So, well, not they'll have less time than that, right?
You're
But
right.
where do you begin on these big things? Because one other thing I was thinking about, like, um, some things like city planning, like I-94 and how we're going to change I-94. They'll spend 2, 3 years collecting feedback before they actually decide on a plan and put money to it. And so these projects go on for like 6 years. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's really hard to get someone to show up at a planning meeting when this project is not really even happening for 3 years down the road.
Well, and the issue with the planning meetings too is that the people that show up to those, as you said, have they're fantastic because they're going, I'm not even going to see, I might not even see the fruits of this labor because it might take 10, 15 years, 6 years, 5 years, who knows what it's going to be. But it also is a smaller subset. So one of the interesting things that I know in organizations when you're working with an organization is that we really, if you want goals to be effective and people, if you need people to do something about that, now that's not necessarily what you need to do in the city. You're not necessarily getting every citizen to behave in a certain way, although that could be part of some of the goals that you're trying to do. Is they have to buy into the goals, and you talked about that stretch part at the beginning and various different pieces. But we know that when people feel like they have input, when they have what we call this sense of uh, commitment into the goal, that I have had say in that, you are much more committed to it. So I don't, and again, when you're talking about like how do we fix Uptown, as you said, there's lots of different perspectives. And so how do you, the first part is aligning people around that larger aspirational goal. And if we can align around that, then it gets down to tactics. And tactics are going to be, a variety of different things. But again, maybe we can leverage some of those tactics together in various different pieces. I will tell you that what is really important, and I think that oftentimes cities miss, is a couple different things. One is, you need to start and show progress quickly. You need to take a, if it's, even if it's a small area, but it needs to be highly visible. It can't be a small area that is tucked away off on the side. It needs to be visible. People need to see it. They need to go, oh, there is progress happening, which is one of the pieces that I think we often miss, is that we're doing all this work and it may be background work and the stuff underneath the city. Well, sometimes you need some highly visible, showstopper type things to get people going, oh, it is moving forward. It's not moving back. It's that progress principle that we talked about. That's one. Two, as we talked about, the hard part about making progress in different perspectives and different things is who's making those determinations, and again, are they listening to the larger audience out there, or are they listening to a small contingent of the people? And that is, oftentimes the case, because a small contingent of the people are the ones who vote, who are the ones who are able to get people onto, a ticket, and therefore have a greater sway. But in reality, when you're trying to govern, you need to govern for all. It's the same thing when you lead. You need to lead for all within your organization. And so you need to at least listen to them and go out. And oftentimes you have to be the one to go out and initiate that. You can't expect them to come to you. And I think too often that's what some of our political leaders do, is they're not going to where the people are. They are just expecting the people to come to them, and they're only listening to a small subset of the larger big picture of that. And then third, I think, one of the big pieces that we always see from a perspective of, goals and various different pieces is, as you said, that time frame, right? and if there are changes that do take long time on this, what are the milestones that you have? And that can be tied into what I talked about first, and making sure that you get something that shows some progress. But that isn't always going to be the case. You can't do that on some larger scale changes to, homelessness or various different things. So what are the milestones that you want to see, so you can show that you're making progress and that it's moving in the right direction, whether that be a 6 month progress mark, a 1 year progress mark, a 5 year progress mark, whatever that would be. And don't be overly, I mean, there's a thing, another thing in behavioral science called the planning fallacy. It's a behavioral bias that we have. We always think that we can finish things much faster than we typically do. And it's the same thing in city. It's like the promises that people make. And I know part of that is to get elected, you have to say, hey, we're going to change this next year. And it's not going to happen for 5 years.
So, that made me think about what happens in other countries and whether um, that planning fallacy is uniquely American, because I get frustrated in that you'll see like China or another country will build like this massive bridge, and or even I think this happened in where was it, Baltimore, when that tanker ran
Yeah.
into that bridge. They were able to get that thing fixed in like under 6 months.
Well, look at the bridge, the 35W bridge, right? I mean, we were able to get that done in minimal amount of time for the amount of that is. And that it shows. So there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of, elements that people have to jump through. And again, China has, a very authoritarian government. And so instead of asking the people, and you're like trying to, we have to get rights and we have to do environmental studies and we have to do all this other things, they can just say, no, we need a bridge, we're gonna do a bridge, and it's gonna happen. I don't know if I want that, right? So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
that's not necessarily what I want. But there is this aspect of taking away the red tape and going, why are we doing this? And why do we need to have, why does getting citizen input take 2 years when we have Zoom, we have a variety of other aspects. I know the work that I do with organizations. If I said, to help get the input that we need to design this program, it's going to take 2 years, and I'm going to have to do, I'm going to hold one session 1 month, and then it's going to be 2 months until I hold the next session. I get drummed out, right? But we don't expect better than that from government. And I think there are different ways of being able to do that. And not that it's going to be more costly, it could actually be less costly. And you should be able to do that more efficiently. And I think sometimes we just don't take that into account.
Yeah, George Floyd Square is a perfect example. I mean, the disagreement over how they thought they had an agreement over what it should be, and they took a couple years of surveys, and then now it just got basically sent back to restudy it, and so we're probably not going to have anything in that square for till 2027, and so it's frustrating, and I don't know how you reach that proper balance of basically input versus action,
Yeah.
because at some point there does need to be action. It can't,
Well, and some of the issues, and I was on a planning committee, the citizen, I forget what the acronyms were for the 35W bridge
CPAD.
over Lake Street and the rapid bus transit. And again, we it was years and years, and they had done stuff 10 years before that, looking at environmental impacts and other aspects and talking to community, and then it got put on hold. And obviously there's budget and variety of different pieces that go into that. But part of the issue is that the people that were in that first round are no longer part of the second round. And
Mm-hmm.
the people that, 2 years is a long time within a city, and particularly within a neighborhood, and particularly if neighborhoods are transient. I live in Whittier. We are 92% rental, I think. And so the people that live here now, there's a big percentage of those people who won't be living here in 5 years or in 2 years. So you're gonna ask a whole different set of people who might have a whole different set of ideas, and you will never get a full consensus if you keep doing that. So I think there's a big opportunity to be able to make that faster and better.
So let's talk about your neighborhood, Whittier. You've been there, I think you said over 30 years. Is that right?
In Whittier, 27, 28, something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
pretty close.
So why did you choose there to live 27
Because
years ago?
I was young and cool, and it was the kind of fun area to live in when I first started. Um, and rents were affordable when I rented. We moved here again when my wife and I bought our house here. We'd actually had another house just 4 blocks away, again in Whittier. Um, and at first, when we first looked at our very first house, it was in the Wedge, and Lindale was the demarcation point where Erin, my wife, wouldn't look on the other side. And then we saw that, well, no, that's changing, right? And she had an old mental model of Minneapolis. She grew up here. And so she kind of had her boundaries of safe areas, vibrant communities, various different pieces. And living in the Wedge, we were more closer to Whittier, and so all of a sudden we were over here more often. We realized, oh, it's actually changing. It's up and coming. There's lots of cool, renovation and work that's being done. We're seeing lots of businesses on Nicollet, all that kind of stuff. And so we bought over in Whittier, and then again we bought again further into Whittier, and the neighborhood, the block that we're on at that point, lots of relatively, people who had put a lot of work into their homes and changed them from being boarding houses into single family homes. And a lot of that was going on. And so we loved it.
So there were actual like boarding houses, like single room
Yeah.
occupancy
Our
in Whittier
our
now.
our house, it was like three owners before us was a boarding house, and so there are locks on every bedroom door because they would rent out the bedroom, and you would rent, so they had, and then the living room had been closed off, and that had been another rental room, and so all this, and it's a 1902. It has really great woodwork and various different things, and so thankfully somebody came in and realized, hey, we can bring this back to what, it used to be in the grandeur that it was. And so we're very blessed to be able to have this house. And I think many of the houses along the block were maybe not in that same situation, but very similar.
So you said that it's about 90% rental now. Is that an increase from when you
No, I think
first?
it's been pretty consistent for that entire time. So I don't know exactly, but it hasn't gone from like 70% up to 90. It's either been in the high 80s, low 90s. So it's been pretty consistent as far as I know.
But I had seen in recent statistics that crime has been a little bit more elevated in Whittier than some of the other neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Has that been something you've seen? And
It is. It's something. I mean, so just I mean, again, I think there was a big shift with the pandemic, and then George Floyd and all that happened after that, and there was a, again, from the psychologist in me, almost the sociology part of the background on that, is there's a shift in people's attitudes and mindsets around that, and particularly disadvantaged people and people who might be younger generation in various different pieces, kind of bringing that. So I've seen it. It's a city. We've always had a element of crime. We did not have the carjackings that we had, and thankfully those are down from what they were a couple of years ago. But we had a we had a person shot outside of our house a few years ago. That would have never, we would have never thought about that 10, 15 years ago. That was just, no, this is a family. We have kids all over this neighborhood. So that has changed.
And I'm sure there's a science-based explanation for this, but you talked about that shooting, and it seems like what happens is that that is such a big event. It sticks in people's minds, right? So
Yeah.
even if you're 3 years after that event and you're telling people crime is down, they still reference back to, yeah,
Yeah.
but there was a shooting on my, so what's happening there? How come we
Yeah.
don't update our
We
process or
we have
thinking
a
on that?
yeah, we have a thing called anchoring, right? So we get anchored in on highly emotional, visceral type elements within our lives. And so it's hard to disengage. And then the other piece on that is those big kind of emotional components, they shift our attitudes and beliefs on things. And attitudes and beliefs are really hard to shift. And so again, part of the anchoring thing, there's some really fun research out there that I can anchor people in by with phony data, before asking them a question. So in other words, I can say, "Oh, tell me the last two digits of your social security number." Right? And then you think about that and you write it down, if it's 8792 or if it's 141, 221, right? And then I ask you, how much do you think this widget costs? And if you have a higher last two digit number of your social security, you will actually, if you don't know the cost, right? And we specifically make it a device that most people don't know, you're going to drastically say that that's higher in cost than the people who have a lower number. Just because I had you write down the last two digits of your social security number beforehand, that gets lodged in our brain and we use it as a reference point, which is really crazy. Part of the thing that I love about behavioral science and psychology is, how sometimes we're really unrational in the way that we think. But that aspect is multiplied when you think about those big emotional events. And so you get anchored in that something is unsafe. It's, again, if you look at the big, kind of political talks over from the national election, you can just go about what was anchored in, even though the reality of the again, crime being, rampant and up. In the past 2 years, crime has been down, right? Nationally in various different pieces, and particularly around immigrants being, crime in different pieces. And we know from all the research, immigrants actually are less likely to commit crime than native-born U.S. citizens. So all of that taken into account is coming from some of that, the way that our brain just processes information. Then we like consistency, we like sticking with our beliefs, and we get anchored in on kind of perceptions.
And I would say inflation is one of the problems with inflation is that anchoring, right? So when you go, and I basically can hardly do the grocery shopping in our family because it just blows me away how much everything is. So
Yeah,
like I have a concept in my mind of how much eggs should cost.
yeah,
And a dozen eggs in my mind, they should be under $4. But often I
but
go to the store and the other day, like some sort of free range, I don't know what was special about them. They were 9.40 for
yeah.
I took a picture of the price because I couldn't believe it.
But that is, again, when did you anchor in on that belief, and was it apples to apples? Again, free range, non-organic, whatever has always been, but that's not what you're necessarily comparing it to. You're comparing it to that dozen grade A eggs that I get, that are there, that I'm old enough. I remember when it was like under $2 for those, and that's it. It's really interesting because we do anchor in on sometimes really far back, because if we don't pay attention. So this comes in again. I'm sorry, I'm getting way deep into some of the stuff, but we don't focus in on those things until something triggers that, right? So I get anchored in from 15 years ago and I don't pay attention, even though those eggs prices have been going up slightly every year, every year, every year, right? But in my head, I'm still thinking of the price from 15 years ago until there's a news article about the inflation, and it's, inflation is at 6%, and eggs have gone from 3.99 up to 5.10 or whatever it would be. And I'm still back at 1.99, and that even it feels even bigger for me. And so that gets to be some of that aspects. So.
So, in the last couple minutes here, I'm gonna put you on the spot for goals.
Okay.
And I thought maybe you could share if you had to pick a goal for the city as a whole, something you'd like to see next year, and then a goal under that for the Whittier neighborhood.
Ah,
What
oh.
would those be?
So I mean, you and I have talked about, various different things. I mean, there's lots. I mean, I could pick a ton of different goals for the city. I think one that doesn't necessarily get as much play and one that is near to my heart is we need to be better as a city at encouraging and supporting small businesses. And, for me, I think that really a vibrant city is one that is filled with small local businesses that like you want to go to that draw people in, not just from the neighborhood, but from around the rest of the city and from the outlying suburbs, right? Those unique places that you can think of. Electric Fetus has been around forever within the Whittier neighborhood, and it's a destination place that people come to, right? Some of the restaurants that we have around here and different things. But I think that the city hasn't done enough in order to really listen to the needs of small business owners and to take away some of the red tape that we talk about or put the elements in there around that. And sometimes I think they actually even view businesses themselves as bad, and I don't understand that. And maybe that's just again me being anchored in on some non-real things. And so my goal for the city is to really say, how can we create a vibrant, thriving community of small businesses that are going to meet not just the needs of our local citizens, but also draw people in from around the community and the nature to give that city that feel that, hey, this is happening. This is cool.
So I, I like that goal. So let's say we're gonna meet again next December and have this
Yep.
conversation again. What would be an indicator to you that the city's made progress towards supporting or building back small businesses?
So one is, I mean, you can just drive down. So in Whittier, you drive down Nicollet Avenue, and Nicollet has actually weathered, I think, the last couple of years better than maybe some of the other corridors that are on there. But in Uptown, you would drive down Hennepin Avenue in the, Hennepin and Lake area, and everything is boarded up. Let's make sure that we're not having those boarded up, that we are having small businesses and making allowances for them, maybe working with landlords and saying, how can we do this? I don't know exactly how to do that. I'm not a city planner. I'm not within that, but there have to be ways that we can encourage, that we can incentivize people to, start something. And they can be a wide variety of different things. So for me, it would be seeing a lot of those boarded up, shops or just the empty shop. I mean, the other thing I see, new builds that have that ground floor that have been designated as retail, and they're empty, and they've been empty not just for 1 year, not for 2 years, but for 3, 4, 5 years. And I'm just going, that's where we need that. And I don't, it can be a variety of different things. And to that, it shouldn't just be as I know you mentioned in one of your articles, got a little bit of feedback, e-cigarette shops and cell phone repair and different things. They need to have, destination things that are unique, pieces that are going to drive the local families to go to, places that you can walk to maybe spend an afternoon doing some shopping or reading or eating or new kind of get haircuts, different things. I don't care, but we need to do more of that, I think.
Yeah, and community forms around certain businesses, right? Like
Exactly.
Electric Fetus, you mentioned, that's a good example where it brings people in, there's a community, it's kind of a staple of the neighborhood. Um, so
And
is that goal the same for Whittier, or would you have a different goal for Whittier? You just want to see
no, I
more?
think I think I think that's my goal for Whittier as well. If I had a secondary role, but this is just me being maybe an old curmudgeon guy, right? As I have, and my kids laugh at me. Yeah, graffiti just bugs the hell out of
Right.
me,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and
yep.
and so I would love to see, a graffiti removal and lessening, like, there's an underlying drive for that graffiti, and again, the broken window theory has not necessarily stood up great to the test of time, but there is some still good research that shows that, hey, once you have, certain amount of graffiti and others, it begs more, right? And so you can
Mhm.
see that if a wall hasn't been tagged, it doesn't get tagged. But once it gets tagged, the speed at which additional tags happen to it is fast. So
Right.
there is research that shows that, and there are different things. And I think most of the the element around the broken window policies that was implemented in New York was about the way that it was handled, not necessarily the theory itself that, hey, a broken window will all of a sudden encourage further broken windows. That's true. That has been definitely shown. It's how we handle that. It's not going out and locking people up for those minor offenses, but what can we do in order to make sure that we don't have that happening, that we aren't, encouraging others to tag different things or to break different windows, and it lends itself again into perceptions, as we talked about the perception of egg prices. Well, if I'm coming in from outside from a suburb and I'm going through an area where there's a whole bunch of graffiti and litter and different pieces out, I form an opinion. It might not be true at all, but I form an opinion, and therefore I won't come back and frequent that place, and I will feel more scared, and I will have a number of other factors that come into play. So
And
that
I
was
would
two
say,
things. I apologize.
well, I would say that it's not just about like you as an outsider coming in and seeing graffiti and have an opinion. It's also like if that's your neighborhood and you
Yeah,
see that every day. And a good example would like if you have like a median in your neighborhood or some sort of vacant lot or what, and it's filled with trash and weeds and etc. There's a certain I don't know, like it kind of says this neighborhood doesn't respect this area, right?
yeah,
Because they're not, but if you go through a different neighborhood and that median or vacant lot has like a nicely tended water garden and flowers and people volunteer to pick up the trash and there's a committee that oversees it, that's saying we respect our neighborhood, right? And it
yeah,
kind of says you should respect it too, right?
yeah. And
And
that's a big thing. We are social creatures, and social norms drive, again, I can go into all the background on this, but it's a fascinating element, right? It is. It's like, all right, well, if we see that the neighborhood is well maintained and kept up, we're going to do our part. I'm going to pick up that extra, litter that's on the sidewalk or on the ground, because I know that's the norm within this neighborhood. I'm less likely to do that. I mean, certain individuals will always do it. Certain individuals will always never do it, but there's a vast majority in the middle who, like, look for those cues, look for those things that say, this is what we do here. And if we do this here, then I will more likely do it. So,
well, Kurt, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about goals for 2025. is there a website if people wanted to follow up on this or order your workbooks? Like, where should they go?
Yeah, thank you. So if you're just interested in any more behavioral science, would love you to listen in to Behavioral Grooves. You can get it on any of your podcast services or on YouTube. Just kind of Google Behavioral Grooves, and you'll find that. If you're interested in Goal Shift or any of the goal products that we talked about, you can go out to behaviorshift.shop. Or probably the easier way is just go out to Amazon, and you can type in behavior shift, excuse me, and actually there's a slash between behavior and shift, and then it'll come up, and you can see that, and so that's all out there. And again, if anybody from the city is listening and they're interested in getting a behavioral science to kind of just think through how do you nudge people to do some of the right behaviors or do some different pieces, I'm happy to talk with anybody. So council people, mayor, anybody in any of the different, planning agencies or any of the agencies, happy to talk to you.
Well, great. I'll recap that all in the newsletter. So thank you so much. And, hopefully we'll do this again. If not sooner, definitely next December again, and we'll kind of check up on how some of our. We'll see if I've gotten to 50 newsletters, and if we've seen some small
One of the
businesses
things we
pop
didn't
up.
talk about, goals, is having an accountability partner, and that's a big piece. And so I can be your accountability partner on that, Terry. I'll hold your nose
Perfect.
to the grindstone here. So here we go. All right, well, you need two to start the year off. I better see those before January 1st. Here we go.
All right, we'll talk again. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody. Bye bye.